I refused to let my husband borrow a large sum of money from his family. And right after that, his entire family decided to organize a vote to pressure me into changing my decision. They smiled and acted as if this was completely normal. My husband, Alex, merely chuckled and supported them, saying, "Then let's vote on something else." When I pulled a sheet of paper from the envelope, the room suddenly erupted into chaos. Looking back at my marriage to Alex, I can't help but feel a profound sense of disappointment, as if I were lost in a maze I had built myself. 8 years together seemed like a long enough time for me to believe that love would be the most solid foundation. But now, everything feels like a blurry painting, unclear and smeared. I always felt like a stranger in his family. Everyone in his family was powerful, wealthy, and influential. They had unrealistic expectations I could never meet. I tried my best to fit in. I attended every party, every gathering, hoping to be accepted, but that feeling always left me feeling abandoned. One evening, his family gathered again in a room glowing with warm yellow light. Everyone sat around the dining table, chatting among themselves without acknowledging my presence, as if I were invisible. I smiled as I listened to their stories, but inside, I felt empty. "Mom, I think the company has a lot of opportunities this year, especially in the real estate sector in Miami," Alex's older brother, Jonathan, said, his eyes lighting up as he spoke of his achievements. "That's wonderful, Jonathan." Alex's mother praised him, but I couldn't help but feel the void as no one asked about my work. "Thanks," I said with a faint smile, setting my wine glass down. But that smile seemed unable to penetrate the cold wall they had built around me. Alex looked at me for a moment, but then his eyes quickly returned to his mother. "Yeah, I think Mom is right. We'll go far if we keep this up," he said. But to me, he looked like a dutiful son, incapable of doing anything but trying to please everyone. Moments like that made me feel like an outsider. I had done everything, yet never truly felt like I belonged. "Alex," I tried to catch his eye, but he only gave a vague response. "Am I missing something here? I don't have a place in this family, do I?" He looked at me, slightly confused, but then quickly turned away, his gaze drifting back to his family. "I just want everything to be peaceful," he said softly, but it wasn't strong enough to make me feel his love. All that time, I had tried to fit in to become a part of his family. But the more I tried, the more I realized that his love wasn't strong enough to protect me. It seemed like the approval of his family mattered more than anything else. Every time he sided with them, every time he stayed silent while I was being disrespected, I realized something painful. My love could never compare to his loyalty to his family. "I love you, you know that," Alex used to say. But in the moments I needed him most, he stood still, silent. "Your love might be strong, but it's not strong enough to protect me. Your family has already arranged everything," I said, my voice choking. I had given him my whole heart, but in the end, I realized that love wasn't enough for him to stand up for me, not enough for him to choose me over his family. And I, once a part of his family, now was nothing more than a ghost in their lives. What hurt me the most was the action of Alex's younger brother, Danny. Danny, Alex's younger brother, was always the one the family worried about due to his unstable financial situation. Unlike Alex, who had a stable job and a successful career, Danny was always struggling to make money, and every effort he made seemed to fall apart. Danny once had many dreams and ambitions. He always believed he would become a successful businessman. However, the financial decisions he made were often reckless and lacked clear planning. I still remember the early days of his career when he excitedly launched an online tech store. He invested a lot of money in inventory, but it didn't take long for him to realize the market was too competitive and his products had nothing special to attract customers. At that point, he couldn't repay the loans he had taken out to buy the goods, and those debts followed him like a dark shadow, haunting him every moment. After that, Danny tried his luck in stock investing. He borrowed money from family and friends to invest in stocks he believed would skyrocket quickly. But the stock market is a dangerous game, and with his lack of experience, Danny suffered major losses when his investments plummeted, losing a significant amount of money. Each time that happened, the family had to step in and bear the burden, as they always considered Danny unlucky. someone who lacked the skills to manage money and was constantly chasing opportunities without ever being truly prepared. After every failure, Danny would return home and share heartbreaking stories about his poor decisions. Although the family offered him advice and encouragement, he never changed, continuing to dive into risky choices without learning from the past. But this time was different. This time, Danny had gone too far. He didn't just borrow a large sum from the bank, he also persuaded his parents to co-sign the loan. Even though the family had warned him, out of love for their son, Alex's parents agreed to help. But when Danny couldn't repay the debt, the family didn't know what to do, and they turned to me as their only hope. A wave of disappointment rose in me every time I thought about Danny. He never learned from his past mistakes. Every time he faced financial hardship, instead of reflecting on the problem and learning how to manage his spending, he sought escape through new loans without ever having a clear plan to repay them. And this time, the family believed I was the only one who could help him. That made me feel like a tool they could use whenever they ran into trouble, without ever seeing me as a person with the right to say no. "Sis, I don't know what to do anymore," Danny said over the phone, his voice weak, as if he were about to cry. "I borrowed everything I could, but now I can't pay the debt. And the bank is threatening me. If I don't come up with the money, I'll get sued. Sis, I've run out of options." My heart tightened when I heard his words, but I also knew this wasn't the first time he had been in this situation. What troubled me was why they all treated forcing me to help as something natural. Alex's family had long valued harmony in the household and believed that helping a relative in need was my responsibility. To them, it seemed inevitable. They never asked whether I had the means, nor did they ever consider how I felt being burdened with Danny's mistakes. They simply assumed that because I was part of the family, I had the obligation to help, regardless of whether I wanted to or not. Every time his family asked me for help, I felt like prey being pulled into a never-ending spiral. I had lent money before, but this time, I couldn't keep carrying someone who never changed, someone who only knew how to run from his responsibilities. The amount, $18,000, was far too much. Danny needed to learn how to face his own mistakes. However, just 3 days later, I received a call from Alex's mother, and her tone this time wasn't as gentle as usual. She said the family wanted to hold a meeting at Alex's house and requested my presence. "Dear, the family needs to talk about Danny. We'll meet at your home. You must attend." Though her words sounded gentle, I could feel the pressure behind every syllable. Once again, I had no choice. This time, I felt something was wrong. Why was the family calling me to a meeting without telling me the agenda? And why was I the only one in the family being summoned? Anxiety started to creep in. When I stepped into my in-laws' house, the atmosphere in the room felt heavier than ever. Every member of Alex's family was there, except Danny. I sat down, and their eyes did not hide their expectations. Each one seemed to be waiting for me to offer a solution to Danny's problem. I could feel the suffocating tension, as if the air itself was closing in on me. As the family meeting went on, the tension only grew. Alex's father sat at the head of the table, his eyes full of determination. "We have made a democratic decision," he declared, his voice firm and without hesitation, as if the decision had already been made long ago. "Our family must help Danny. And you two are the only ones in a position to resolve this." Alex's mother, sitting beside him, followed up. Her tone was soft but firm. "We're all worried about Danny, dear. He's in a very difficult situation. Without your help, the family won't be able to fix this. We must help our loved ones during hard times. That's what our family has always believed in." Alex's mother's words hit me like a heavy blow to the heart. They didn't just see me as part of the family. They believed helping Danny was my duty, even though I had already said no. Even after I clearly stated that I couldn't help, they still tried to corner me into a position where refusal was no longer an option. Everyone looked at me, their eyes full of expectation, as if I were the only one who could fix everything. Their stares felt like they were waiting for me to change my mind, and I felt like an opponent in a vote whose outcome had already been predetermined. Being treated like a tool to solve their problems was deeply insulting. How could they believe I had no right to refuse? "I can't help this time," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. though inside me rose a storm of anger and disappointment. As I said, I don't have the ability to lend Danny that money. I can't keep carrying the weight of his responsibilities. But even though I had spoken clearly, Alex's father kept pushing the conversation. You have to understand, this is your responsibility. We are family, and family helps each other in hard times. Alex's father sat across from me, his eyes cold and calculating. Alex's mother, seated next to him, said nothing, but I could feel the dissatisfaction in her gaze. I knew they wouldn't let this matter go easily. Then, Alex's father spoke again, his voice as cold as a blade slicing through the air. You cannot refuse, he said, with no softness in his tone. The assets you and Alex own are joint property. We've considered each other family, and if the family needs help, then we must be willing to provide it. His words felt like a command, and when everyone agreed, I felt like a puppet in their hands. What hurt me the most, deepening my disappointment, was Alex. He sat silently next to his mother, not saying a word to defend me. His eyes didn't meet mine. They stayed fixed on the floor, as if he didn't want to be part of this conversation. He didn't object when his parents asked me to help, didn't speak up when they pressured me to change my mind. He seemed like just another participant in the discussion, not my husband, but another member of their family, where I was the outsider. I felt like I was standing in a dark corner, while the people I loved the most refused to stand up for me. Alex, say something. I finally broke the silence, looking into his eyes, hoping he would speak up and defend me like a true husband. But his eyes didn't meet mine. They brushed past me, then turned back to his parents. I don't want to make a big deal out of this, he said, his voice gentle, as if everything was just fine. We're family, right? Sometimes these decisions are necessary. Then he turned away. Not a word of defense, not a word of comfort. That felt like a punch to the heart. How could he say, we're family, when he didn't even stand by me? How could he stay silent while I was being treated like an outsider in my own marriage? I couldn't believe what I had just heard. I frowned, feeling a surge of anger swell inside. Yes, our assets are jointly owned by me and Alex, but I don't agree with being forced to help Danny. I've made it clear that I cannot lend him any money. But Alex's father just smiled faintly and continued. That's not exactly how it works, dear. The assets you think you own are no longer just yours. Everything we have in this family, including what you possess, is communal. And if the family needs help, we have the right to reclaim that portion to help Danny through this crisis. Their words struck my mind like a hammer. They were saying that the property Alex and I built together, including the house and everything we'd worked hard for, was now part of the family's communal property, and they had the right to take it back whenever they saw fit. I felt cornered, with no option left except to do as they demanded. The feeling of being insulted and suffocated rose within me. I felt like I had endured enough, and it was time to stand up for myself. The words of Alex's parents, their looks, all of it added to the feeling that I was nothing more than a tool to serve the interests of their family. I couldn't take it anymore, and I decided to fight back in a way they would never expect. I had prepared thoroughly before facing Alex's family. Every time I was pressured to help Danny, I felt like I was being dragged into a trap I couldn't escape. In the past, I had grown tired and agreed reluctantly. But this time, I was determined not to let myself be used again. I needed to protect myself and assert that I wasn't the only one in the family responsible for bearing all the burdens. Ever since I received the call from Alex's mother, I knew what was coming. An uneasy feeling rose within me, and I couldn't stop thinking about the upcoming meeting. I clearly sensed that Alex's family was going to force me into doing something I didn't want to do. So I began preparing the important documents to protect my rights, documents I was certain would make it impossible for them to keep manipulating me. I spent an entire evening organizing all my financial papers. I rummaged through the drawer of my desk, where I kept all important documents. I pulled out a copy of the property ownership certificate for the house Alex and I bought together. It was a property I had saved and worked hard for over many years. However, after the conflicts within the family began to escalate, I decided to separate my portion of the assets from Alex's control, even though we were married. Along with that, I also found the prenuptial agreement I had signed before marrying Alex. Back then, I truly trusted him, but after everything that had happened, I knew I needed to protect my interests. In that agreement, there was a specific clause I had insisted on adding before marriage. In the case of financial discrepancies or disputes over property, each party will retain individual ownership of their assets. That clause had protected me, ensuring that if any financial issue arose, I would not be responsible for Alex's debts or decisions. I looked into each of their eyes without saying a word, just waiting for them to realize what was about to happen. "This is the ownership document for our house," I began, my voice calm but firm. "And this is the revised prenuptial agreement I signed. I am under no obligation to help Danny or anyone else in this family. I have my own rights and property, and I will no longer allow anyone to take advantage of me." The entire family stared at the papers I laid out, their eyes wide with shock. Clearly, they hadn't expected me to come so well prepared. Alex's mother, the usual family authority, went pale and said nothing. Alex's father, normally cold and assertive, stood frozen, unsure how to react. And especially Alex, he sat in silence, eyes wide open, as if trying to process what was happening. "I've prepared everything to avoid being exploited," I continued, my gaze steady. "I'm not the only one in this family who can shoulder the burden. And I won't let anyone, not even Alex, force me to help when I simply can't. This relationship cannot go on if I'm no longer respected." As my words echoed through the room, I felt a strange sense of liberation. At last, I had said what I truly felt, everything I had endured for so long. Every eye in the room was fixed on me. No one dared speak. I looked at Alex, my eyes full of both determination and pain. "Alex," I said, my voice unwavering, "you've left me standing alone for far too long. Today, I can't stay silent anymore. I can't keep living in a family where I always feel like I'm being used." Only then did Alex slowly raise his head to look at me. He still didn't seem to fully grasp the situation, but I could see concern creeping into his eyes. He shifted uncomfortably, then stood up and walked toward me. I didn't think it would come to this," he said, his voice lowering. "I just wanted to keep the peace in the family." I couldn't help but feel disappointed at those words. "Keep the peace in the family?" I repeated, my voice gentle but not weak. "And what about me? What about how I feel? You always protect your family, but never once protected me." "Why, Alex?" Alex stayed silent, not answering. He just looked at me, his eyes filled with confusion and regret. But those words couldn't change anything. I was too tired to keep staying quiet and enduring it all. His silence, his refusal to intervene when I needed him most, was the answer I had never wanted to hear. In that moment, I realized a painful yet clear truth. It wasn't just Alex's family manipulating me. Alex himself was complicit. He didn't protect me. He didn't speak up when his family treated me like a tool to solve their problems. He was the man I loved, the one I thought would be my rock. But now, he was just a useless bystander, someone who only cared about pleasing his family, never once thinking about how I felt. Everything was clear now. I could no longer endure this manipulation and betrayal. After everything that had happened, I no longer believed in love or loyalty within my marriage. Everything had changed. A sense of loss and disappointment surged over me like a crashing wave. The love I had once given to Alex now meant nothing. I had once believed that our love could overcome any challenge, that we would build a happy life together no matter how difficult things became. But now, I realized that love had only been an illusion, something I had created in my own mind. Danny had manipulated Alex's family and used me as a tool to save himself. Every time he was in trouble, every time he couldn't take responsibility for his actions, the family turned to me as if I were the only one who could help. What I had done wasn't out of love or duty. It was because I was forced, dragged into their decisions without any choice. And Alex, the man I loved, never once stood up to defend me, never once fought for me in this battle. He didn't just abandon me, he became complicit in their manipulation, allowing his family to keep using me. I began to realize that nothing was the same anymore. Every time I tried to express my thoughts, every time I tried to protect my own rights, Alex remained silent. He didn't protect me, didn't stand up to his family, and never once took my side. He was just part of that family, a man too weak to stand against his parents' influence, someone who could never choose me and the values we were supposed to build together over the so-called peace of his family. Alex's choices made me feel like I no longer had a place in my own family. I had tried to fit in. I had tried to love and care. But in the end, I realized I was just an outsider in the very relationship I had poured my heart into. My love didn't have the strength to change anything, and all I received in return was coldness and indifference from the people I loved most. In that moment, I knew I couldn't continue living in a relationship where I was no longer respected. I couldn't keep living in a marriage where I had to grit my teeth through every manipulation, every demand from my in-laws. I used to think that nothing could make me give up on this love, but now I realize that dignity and respect are the most important things in any relationship. I couldn't go on living like a shadow in his family, someone who endured everything but was never treated like a real person. Love cannot survive without respect. And if Alex couldn't stand up for me, then I had to stand up for myself. I looked into Alex's eyes, and in that moment, I knew I couldn't continue living with a man who would never protect me. In the end, I made a decision I never thought I'd have to make. I would leave this marriage. Filing for divorce wasn't an easy step. I thought about it for a long time, wrestled with myself, wondering if there was any way to save the marriage. But the more I thought, the more I realized if I didn't stand up for myself, if I couldn't protect myself, then no one else would. When the divorce was finalized, I didn't feel sadness or emptiness like I had imagined. In fact, I felt relief. A burden I had carried for so many years had finally been lifted. It felt like taking off a heavy, suffocating coat and revealing a freer, stronger version of myself. I realized that I didn't have to keep living in a family full of deceit and manipulation. I could take care of myself. I could rebuild my life without living in the shadow of people who didn't respect me. After the divorce, I received support from Emily, my close friend who had stood by me through the darkest times. She was the one I could confide in, who never judged, only listened and offered honest advice. Emily understood me better than anyone else, and when I decided to start over, she was the only one who never doubted me, never made me feel weak. "I'll help you gather everything you need," Emily said, her voice steady as I shared what had happened. "You're not alone in this. You have the right to protect yourself." She helped me gather evidence of everything that had occurred in my marriage, from the emails I received from Alex's family, to the messages, to the calls I recorded when I felt coerced. We carefully organized everything to make sure that no one could ever take advantage of my vulnerability again. Thanks to Emily, I regained control over my life. I no longer had to live in fear, no longer had to endure the oppression of those who didn't respect me. She helped me see that even though I had lost an important part of my life, I could still rise. I could still take charge of my own destiny. The feeling of freedom, though it came with challenges at first, starting again from scratch, gave me confidence that I was finally on the right path. I was no longer tied to a relationship where I received neither love nor respect. I had reclaimed my power. I had stepped out of the shadows of years of exploitation and pain. With each passing day, I felt stronger. I began taking care of myself, doing things I had long forgotten, small hobbies, big life goals. And more importantly, I learned how to love myself. That wasn't always easy, but I knew I was on the right path to finding the freedom and happiness I truly deserved. Thanks to Emily, I realized that no matter how difficult things got, I could get through them. She was a true friend, and because of her, I no longer felt alone. When I stood up to face my challenges, I knew I wasn't alone anymore.